Good Friday to you, big weekend show coming up, and I'm pleased and honored to begin with Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum. Secretary Burgum, Happy New Year to you in advance. I'm so glad you could join us. I've been talking to various people, Senator Thune, Chris Wright, others, about the year in review. You've got one of the biggest agencies, and you've had a year now. What do you count as the accomplishments at Interior in 2025?
Well, Hugh, great to be with you. But accomplishments for 2025 is really implementing President Trump's common sense agenda about unleashing American energy. And that, broadly speaking, I mean, we're talking about oil and gas. A year ago, U.S. had LNG export restrictions on under the Biden administration. Now, world's largest exporter of LNG, bigger than number 2 and number 3 in the world. And of course, when we're exporting LNG, that's good for Americans here because when we've got foreign purchases or when our allies are buying from us versus our enemies, we are stopping funding wars abroad, and then those purchases here help pay for the infrastructure, the pipelines, and all the facilities here that help make our nation richer. So that part key. But when you take a look at this broad swath of all these amazing, incredible, abundant, resource-filled federal lands, 500 million acres of surface, 700 million acres of subsurface, and 3.2 billion of offshore, the world's largest balance sheet of any company in the interior. It wasn't just the energy industries that the Biden administration was trying to shut down. They effectively killed mining. They were killing timber. They were attacking our ranchers with grazing on Bureau of Land Management. So bringing back the balance sheet of America, restoring these assets to being productive assets which produce for the American people, whether it's food, whether it's energy, whether it's timber, all of these things, 180-degree reversal here following the Trump administration policies, President Trump's lead. And so an exciting first year, off to a great start. And I think it's showing up in the economic data as well.
I think you and Secretary Wright are going to win or lose the 2026 election because energy drives down prices. Energy is freedom. Without it, we don't get anything done. We need nuclear reactors. We need all this different stuff. Beyond exports of LNG, are we increasing production or the leasing of land on which production can occur in the next 3 years within the United States, including the coastal zone?
Yeah, absolutely. Permits, the number is, there's never been a line on a curve like this, but I think permitting for drilling permits on Bureau of Land Management is like up 55% over any other time period. So really getting back into delivering on the drill baby drill side of this, and of course doing it responsibly and smarter. We do it cleaner, smarter, safer than anywhere else in the world. People should be celebrating the fact that we're producing more here. We did hit record oil production numbers this year, and then shows up at the pump with the gas prices, but it doesn't maybe show up in California because it's $2.44 in Houston and it's over $5 in California. And part of that is because we've got a set of policies at the state level which are disrupting the energy in our United States. We got parts of the northeast part of our country in New England, led by New York. Looks more like the EU. California is in a league by its own. 63% of the oil in California now imported from foreign countries. California, as you know, Hugh, used to be an energy powerhouse. I mean, back at 100 years ago, California is producing 25% of the world's oil production. And now it's barely on the list of states in America. They're down to 100,000 barrels of oil a day, even though California is sitting on this resource. California used to have 40 refineries. Now it's got 8 refineries, and 2 of the biggest ones, Valero and Chevron, have announced they're closing their plants. So under the current leadership of California, not only are we importing oil into the state of California through San Francisco Bay and through Long Beach for refining, when those refineries shut down, we're going to be importing refined products by ship, often from foreign countries, just to keep the largest fleet of internal combustion engine vehicles of any state in America going in California. So again, it's common sense versus climate elitism. And those two things are colliding, and affordability is going to win that because the green new scam, as it's been called, because it was a scam. It made promises it couldn't deliver on. It's done one thing. It's delivered higher prices So whether it's electricity or gas prices, higher in blue states than they are in red states. Don't look at the averages, look at it state by state. That's where you can see specifically where President Trump's policies are working. And that's where all the capital is going to flow. It's going to flow the new wave of investment, record investment in our country for capital expenditures in the next generation of AI. It's going to flow towards states with low energy prices. And you're going to see states like California and New York missing out on this next wave of capital investment.
Now, Mr. Secretary, I don't think it's possible to permit a mine in a year, but are you working on critical minerals, rare earth mines? We just had this big discovery in Utah, I noted, so that by the end of the term, America will become more self-reliant on our own resources in the critical categories of rare earths?
Well, fabulous question, and great that you're so astute about this, Hugh. But it turns out you can permit a mine in less than a year. We permitted the Resolution mine in they've been working to get a permit for a Resolution mine in Arizona for 29 years, and we got that mine permitted through because we got, again, Office of Surface Mining. If it's on federal land, those permits come from the Department of Interior, Bureau of Land Management, or the Office of Surface Mining. 4 months. We got them a permit in 4 months. We've permitted uranium mine in America, got that restarted again. They were waiting for an EIS. EIS normally takes 2 years. We did it in 24 days. We've done some EAs, some environmental assessments, which take over a year. We've done those in 12 days. And all of this by just focusing on business process improvement. It wasn't, there was no shortcuts. If a process took 2 years to deliver a permit, it wasn't 2 years worth of work. It might have been 24 days of work, interspersed by sitting for 29 or 30 days in somebody's inbox, as they did the whisper chain of sending the permitting paperwork around. Having come from a background in tech with business process that's before we've even applied AI to this. This was just strike forces of people saying, you come to work, all you do is focus on getting this permit out, and let's see what the actual amount of work content. I think the product that they put out on these shorter time frames is actually better than the ones that take 1 to 2 years, because you have a focused team that's really literally drilling into it and getting the work done. So and then yesterday the House of Representatives passed the SPEED Act, which is about improving permitting in this country and providing certainty for economic development. That's a great piece of legislation. We'll see what the Senate can make it even better and stronger. But we have to get back as a nation to being able to build great things and build them quickly. And we have to be able to get back to actually using our resources versus having an entire armada of NGOs and legal teams who make their living stopping building stuff in America by weaponizing laws supposedly designed to protect the environment. But when you kill a mining project in the U.S., you move it overseas. Again, they do it over there without the EPA, without child labor laws, without whatever. I mean, again, if you're concerned about the global environment, if you're concerned about the environment, you should want to have all of this, all the critical minerals here. That's before you even get to national security. But for national security, we've got to bring mining back alive in this country.
Have you been able to get your arms, I'm throwing a lot at you, but I just want people to know. Have you been able to get your arms around the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs and all of these different agencies? The service is the worst, that have 1,000 rules, none of which often make sense, and the employees of which are not exactly the most motivated people I ever worked with.
Well, I'll tell you, we've got some great progress there as well. And let me start with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We're going through a complete remapping and redo of the Endangered Species Act. That was, again, a classic thing of it was highly weaponized. They would have training classes, Hugh. If you wanted to stop a pipeline or a transmission line or some energy project, you'd use the NEPA, use the EPA stuff to slow a project down. But if you wanted to kill it, then you used Environmental Species Act. The ESA became the Hotel California. I asked the question when I got here, well, shouldn't we be celebrating when things come off the list opposed to going on the list? And because we became a nation where people celebrated when things went on the endangered species list. And what to do when they went on there, then we should be working to make those things better. 97% of the species that have ever entered that list have never come off. That's, if you were grading that on a scale of A to F, that's like an F minus. If we're actually in the recovery business, we've got to be able to get things coming off. That means we're succeeding. And we should be able to get things to come off without moving goalposts. So big progress is going to be made on ESA. On the tribal front, it's been one tribe after another in my office saying that during the Biden administration, including the Alaska North Slope, Alaska natives up there saying we need energy development for our economic basis, schools, healthcare, ever. So we have some big wins going on in tribal country as well.
That is a great, quick summary, Secretary Burgum. Good luck in 2026, and we'll check in again. That's quite a start. Thank you for joining me. Eli Lake is a contributor to the Free Press. He's the host of the Breaking History podcast. I loved his most recent one. Eli, today, the Turning Point USA conference, which is for the kids, right, for the younger people than you and I. They had Ben Shapiro and they had Tucker Carlson. We'll talk about that in a moment. Erica Kirk made an announcement I was somewhat surprised by. I want to play it for you and get your reaction. Cut number one.
We're going to ensure that President Trump has Congress for all 4 years. We are going to get my husband's friend, J.D. Vance, elected for 48 and the most resounding way possible.
All right, so before we move to the second part, are you surprised that she did that?
No, because Turning Point USA, I think, was always very much of a Vance 2028 operation. There was a moment after that horrible assassination where I thought and I still think TPUSA, I should say, is also doing this, but it could have turned into kind of a civic organization that encouraged people to find a church, find religion, go back to God, focus on the lost boys, as Charlie Kirk used to call them, who have found, who have sort of sunk into a life of nihilism online. But I think it's always been, TPUSA is an organization that is largely political. And J.D. Vance was very close with Charlie Kirk. And I think people inside the Republican Party kind of understood this was the grassroots organization for Vance 2028. I think that it might be more wide open than that, and this may be, I think it's maybe too soon to kind of come out and say that because I think there's a lot of things that can happen, but I'm not necessarily surprised, no.
I was surprised because it's an obstacle to growth. Whenever you're declaring, you're excluding, and I thought they were growing. And I think J.D. Vance is probably going to be the nominee, and he's a friend of my program, and I'm glad to have him on all the time, but I don't get involved in the presidential primary until the presidential primary is over, so I was surprised. Now, Ben Shapiro gave a speech at Heritage this week, which was a full frontal attack on Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson responded at TPUSA today in an unusual way. They ended up not debating an argument. Tucker ended up saying, I'm being attacked because it's a way at getting J.D. Vance. That is, I believe, wrong. And I think his ideas are being attacked by various people like Ben, like you, like me, on idea by idea basis. Do you think he capitulated today by switching from the idea debate to the, oh, you're really attacking J.D. Vance debate?
No, I think that's par for the course, unfortunately, for Tucker, who I think was, at earlier parts of his career, a far more thoughtful and serious thinker and writer and broadcaster. I think that Ben Shapiro's speeches at Heritage and at TPUSA will be read in 50 years by young conservatives if they want to understand what was at stake in this moment after the Charlie Kirk assassination in 2025. I thought they were absolutely masterful. Now, yes, the headlines are that he did get personal, not just with Tucker Carlson, but with Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and others. But I think he also laid out important principles that, for the most part, people who are on the right, people who are conservatives, have to renew in every generation. And Ben Shapiro, in my view, has done that. I cannot tell you how much respect I have for what he did. I don't think this needs to be personal, and I think your approach is right. It's not about canceling the person. It's about grappling with the ideas, but a lot of the ideas that we're hearing and the style, the grammar of the political discourse has gone off the rails into conspiracy theory land. And I know that you don't like to talk about some of these people, and I think there's wisdom in that, by the way. But we have to grapple that there are millions of people who tune in online to hear innuendo, garbage, conspiracy, ahistorical stuff that gnaws away at the trust we need to have in basic institutions in order to reform them to save the country. So, I mean, in my view, indulging ideas that, the French and the Mossad and maybe even TPUSA staff may have played a role in the murder is just, it's so toxic. And
well, what I want to get to, Eli, and make
it.
sure I get to
Yeah.
it. I had Leader Thune on this week, and I put it to him squarely. Is it a requirement to be a member of the Republican Party in 99% of the time to be a full-throated ally of Israel and to recognize that they are America's most important ally, and is the GOP going to stand by Israel? And the leader did not hesitate. He said, absolutely. It is part of our core identity to be an ally of Israel. So that's not a negative attack on anyone. I said, look, I know Senator Paul leaves your caucus on that occasionally, and Tom Massey's way gone. But 99% of the time, you've got to be with Israel. And I think that's the positive case. Here are the things we believe in, which is what Ben did, although he left Israel off, I think probably very smartly. But he said, you got to have boundaries to have a party, just like you have to have boundaries to have a country. He did not mention, part of my boundary is support for the state of Israel. Do you think that's going to be part of the boundary for the Republican Party going forward?
I would phrase it differently. I think that there is plenty of room, and I've seen many Zionists and pro-Israel voices have this conversation. I wrote about this 11 years ago, I should say, for the Daily Beast, that you can question whether the military subsidy is wise at this point, the aid to Israel. And there are a lot of Israelis, by the way, who would agree that it's time to phase that out. You can criticize tactics in a very hard war, but when you frame the conflict in Gaza without applying any agency to the party that started the war, and you describe it as a sort of genocide against defenseless people without mentioning the fact that the people who started the war are hiding under tunnels, under mosques and schools and apartment buildings, and have a strategy of using human shields and don't wear uniforms. That's where it gets, in my view, where it's a moral question or question of values. There's plenty of room to have people who would like a less robust American foreign policy that believes that when there are choices to be made with limited resources, we should focus more at home. I think you can be part of the right. I don't think there's any problem with that. The issue is when the criticism curdles into defamation. And that has happened at light speed in certain segments in the online world. And when it becomes conspiratorial, when you hear people say the Israel lobby is the real government of the United States, which is just, you and I both know, is
absurd
nonsense.
to beyond to stupidity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And when you even say that American citizens, many of whom are not Jewish, who support a strong U.S.-Israel alliance, are somehow being disloyal or not as loyal or not putting America first, that's where it bleeds into something which I don't think is acceptable. But those are, again, for value reasons. We can have a debate about policy, no problem. People say you can't criticize Israel. Sure you can. But that's not criticism. That isn't to another realm. And it's not really about Israel. It's about who we are as a movement, as on the right, and as a country.
And as a party, I'm a Republican.
Yes,
the party
absolutely.
has to be for a strong defense, and a strong defense has to support Israel when it needs support. Whether or not that's a military subsidy, I don't know. But if they need F-35s, we sell them F-35. It's that simple. They are our most important superpower ally. Eli Lake, thank you, my friend. Follow him on X at Eli Lake. Joined by Charles C.W. Cook, senior editor at National Review, host of the Charles C.W. podcast, also a frequent contributor to the Editor's podcast. Charles, I've got to press you into service today because we got 8 gallons to get into a 3-gallon show. Secretary Rubio gave a press conference today looking back over the year. So I'm going to play you some clips and have you comment on Secretary Rubio without benefit of my 2 cents so that we can get through them. Here's cut number 2 of the Secretary of State.
When it comes to the Western Hemisphere, the single most serious threat to the United States from the Western Hemisphere is from transnational terrorist criminal groups, primarily focused on narco trafficking, but they're in all sides businesses as well. So the good news is we have a lot of countries in the region that openly cooperate and work with us to confront these challenges. Mexico, their level of cooperation with us is the highest it's ever been in their history. Throughout Central America, for the most part, except for maybe Nicaragua and to some extent Honduras, we've had great cooperation from Ecuador, from El Salvador, from Ecuador being in South America, but across the Pacific coast where we're also undertaking efforts. Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama. These are all nations that cooperate with us openly in search of stability in the region. You move to the Caribbean basin, in Trinidad, in Guyana, in Jamaica, in the Dominican Republic.
All right, stop right there. Is he right to paint so rosy a picture, Charles?
Well, I think so. We have a tendency to look beyond our immediate neighborhood. Obviously, that wasn't always the case. The Monroe Doctrine put that as the number one priority of our foreign policy. I don't know what he says next. That's the problem. I mean, if he goes on to say, but, and then to list all of the problems that we have, then I think it will be balanced. But there is a lot of good, yeah.
Let's go to next, cut number 5.
When I say these things about Maduro and his role in narco trafficking, it's not, I hear his reports, Marco Rubio says it, it's not me. A grand jury in New York, in the Southern District of New York, okay, a grand jury in the Southern District of New York was presented evidence and came back with an indictment, not just against Maduro, by the way, but against a bunch of people in his government for narco trafficking. A bunch. He had, his nephews or the nephews of his wife indicted, convicted in the United States for narco trafficking. Like this was until President Trump started doing something about these narco trafficking links, nobody disputed that Maduro and his regime was in cahoots with narco traffickers. Not to mention the fact that they unleashed Tren-de-Agua gangs on the United States. They've unleashed, a mass migration event, perhaps the largest in history. 8 million people have left Venezuela since 2014. So also destabilizing all the countries in the region. Who've had to assume people that are fleeing this illegitimate regime. So, but nobody disputed the drug links. So that's what the president's been focused on, and that's the problem. And that's the problem in Venezuela.
What do you think of that, Charlie Cook?
So I think everything he said there was correct. What I have a slight problem with is the jump that is made, which turns narco traffickers into narco terrorists, or proposes that we are in some sense at war with Venezuela. But it's obviously true that's a huge problem. That country is unstable. It's not anymore, if it ever was, a proper democracy. And the export of drugs into the United States is a proper concern of the federal government. So I agree with pretty much everything he said. I'm just sometimes not on board with the and-thens.
The and-then in this case is the embargo or quarantine of the ghost fleet. I'm 100% in favor of that. Are you?
Well, I think we need some congressional authorization for it. I don't object to it per se. I just think we ought to be careful with our terms. As I say, I don't think that the problems that are being posed by Venezuela are terrorism. I think the problem is we have an unstable anti-American regime very close to our borders that sends drugs into the United States, which we don't want them to. So I'm mostly with you.
Yeah, and I don't think we need congressional authorization. Back to 1990, we were seizing Saddam's tankers after the invasion of Kuwait, and there was no AUFM there. Let's go to his statement on Ukraine and Russia, cut number 4.
The reason why this war hasn't ended, and that is because there's complex factors at play. I know that sounds like a throwaway line, but it's true. What we have tried to do in this entire process, and let's be clear about this. I mean, the United States is engaged in this. The president says this, and I'll translate what I think, he's trying to say to you in all of this, and I think he's been pretty clear about it. It's not our war. It's a war in another continent. We have equities. We have engagement in this war, but it's not our war per se. But we have been told by everybody, I think everybody would agree, that there's only one nation on earth, there's only one entity on earth that can actually talk to both sides and figure out whether there's a way to end this war peacefully. And that's the United States. And we've invested a lot of time, a lot of energy at the highest levels of our government, I believe, President Trump has had more meetings with foreign leaders and others on the war in Ukraine than on any other subject, including trade. Steve and Jared have invested time. I've invested time. The Vice President, the Secretary of War, others, Secretary of Treasury, and more have invested a tremendous amount of time and energy in this. And what we're trying to figure out here is what can Ukraine live with and what can Russia live with, sort of identify what both sides' positions are and see if we can sort of drive them towards each other to some agreement. Wars end generally in one of two ways. Surrender by one side for another or a negotiated settlement. We don't see surrender anytime in the near future by either side, and so only a negotiated settlement gives us the opportunity to end this war. A negotiated settlement requires two things: both sides to get something out of it and both sides to give something. And we're trying to figure out what can Russia give and what do they expect to get, what can Ukraine give and what can Ukraine expect to get. In the end, the decision will be up to Ukraine and up to Russia. It will not be up to the United States. So that's the role we are trying to play in this. And that's why you see so many meetings going on. This is not about imposing a deal on anybody. It is about determining what both sides expect and need to have and what both sides are prepared to give in return for it, and figuring out whether we can have those two overlap. And of course, that takes a lot of time and a lot of hard work. It can't generally be done in the media or in press conferences. I think we've made progress, but we have ways to go. And obviously the hardest issues are.
Charles, what do you make of that statement, that framing of what has happened over the past year?
So I think Marco Rubio is very impressive. I also am aware that he's the Secretary of State in an administration. He's not the President of the United States. And what he's doing there is reciting Donald Trump's position on it, which is more equivocal than mine would be. Now, Ukraine is complicated. I do think there's some oversimplification of the matter, especially among Democrats. But I am still slightly uncomfortable with the way that this is discussed. I do think we have more of a vested interest in this than Rubio suggested there. I would suggest that Marco Rubio thinks so as well. It's not his role to say so. He works for the president. But he is right when he says that if we are not going to take that position, then we're going to end this with a normal political style negotiation and what each side can live with, rather than a more principled position.
In the part that you think is oversimplified, what do you say about the Crimean Peninsula, which was traditionally part of Russia? The Crimean War was between Britain and Russia and other people. What do you make about the Crimea in this conversation?
Well, I'm not sure it has to be part of this conversation. I think that the whole question of geography in that area is difficult, but the change here was made in February 2022 when Russia went into Ukraine. The next country over from Ukraine is Poland. Now, I'm not of the view that Russia is necessarily going to run across Ukraine into Poland, and I don't think it can run across Ukraine, as we've seen. But to me, the Crimean question is more abstract to the United States than Ukraine is, because Ukraine is next to a country that has been the source of a huge amount of conflict that has dragged the United States in over the last 100 years. So I'm not suggesting you think otherwise, but sometimes I hear that a question asked as if it's like, well, if that's complicated, then shouldn't Ukraine be complicated? And I'm just not sure those two things tally.
No, I agree with you completely. Some parts of these are easy, and then you get closer to Poland, it gets very, very tough, and we do not want to give up the fortress barrier that Ukraine has given or obliged them to. There's Secretary of State Rubio on Hamas and Israel, cut number 3.
Let me just couch it to you this way. Everyone wants peace. No one wants to return to a war. If Hamas is ever in a position in the future that they can threaten or attack Israel, you're not going to have peace. Okay? You're not going to convince anyone to invest money in Gaza if they believe another war is going to happen in 2 to 3 years. So I would just ask everyone to focus on what are the kind of weaponries and capabilities that Hamas would need in order to threaten or attack Israel as a baseline for what disarmament needs to look like. Because you're not going to have peace. If 2 years from now Hamas is launching rockets or killing Israelis or carrying out, God forbid, another 7th of October type terrorist attack and so forth, you're not going to have peace. So who's going to invest in a peace Who's going to invest in rebuilding a place that's going to get destroyed again in a future war? So that's why disarmament is so critical. Now, what that entails, we're going to leave that to the technical teams to work on. It would have to be something, obviously, that they're willing to agree to, that our partners can push them and pressure them to agree to. It also has to be something that Israel agrees to. In order for that to work, both sides have to agree on it, and we need the space to do it. But that's the way to think about it, okay? You cannot have a Hamas that can threaten Israel in the future. If they can, you won't have peace.
I think that is well put, perhaps as clearly as anyone has put it. What do you think, Charles?
I think that. I was sitting nodding along. You couldn't see me, but I was sitting nodding along. That's exactly what I think as well. I think he put it absolutely perfectly. And I always say to people who ask about this, if the country involved were not Israel and the threat were not from Gaza, if instead the country involved with the United States and the threat were from Canada, it would be extremely obvious to you why the United States were taking that position. And I think Rubio underscored that perfectly. You cannot have peace. It is a false peace while that threat hangs over.
So setting aside tariff discussions, which are endless on the National Review of the Editors, because Philip insists that they be brought up, as do you, how do you grade the first year?
Well, where? Are we doing foreign policy? Are we doing a general?
We're doing it all.
Overview. Okay. I think the foreign policy has been largely good. I don't like the way that Trump talks about foreign dictators sometimes, or how he sometimes talks about Vladimir Putin. I don't think he's a Russian asset or any of that nonsense, but I would rather a more forthright defense of the West. But generally speaking, I'll give him a B there. I think he has made big mistakes on the economy. He's done some good things. The tax bill was very good, but I think tariffs have overshadowed it, and he hasn't got the cost of living under control, and he's in trouble in the polling because of that, may lose the midterms over it. So I'm going to give him a C there, also because while the tax bill was good, it largely maintained the status quo. I think I'll give him an A on the border, which he got under control within a couple of months, perhaps even quicker. People have forgotten this. This is bad for Trump at one level, because now that that issue is solved, people are asking, what did you do for me lately? But we shouldn't forget what an undertaking that was. And then when it comes to some of the executive orders, the dismantling of racial preferences and some of the DEI material that had been invested in the federal government, I'm thrilled by that. So I'm going to give him an A. And the latest, of course, was the backtracking away from so-called disparate impact. So I'll give him an A there as well. And then on his personal conduct, I'm going to give him a F, because I just think that he's his own worst enemy, and he is totally out of control sometimes, and it just hurts him and the movement.
We'll check in on that. That's a pretty good report card division, and I appreciate your running through it. Charles, I will talk to you, if not next week, in the new year. Thank you so much for joining me today. I like someone who can go through all those different issues and be coherent. Charles C.W. Cook on X. Follow him. Follow me to the next segment. Let me also tell you, though, about one of our great sponsors, forfreemarkets.org. Under previous administration, Biden, Obama, vague, outdated policies were used to pressure banks from politically motivated regulators that led to the closure of America's banking system to some accounts. Thankfully, President Trump ended debanking, and he took decisive action to do so. He stopped politically motivated debanking. Americans for Free Market is thanking the president for doing this, for signing the executive order that made it last under his administration. Lawmakers, however, should go further and establish a national standard prohibiting any financial institution from denying services based on politics or religion. To protect financial freedom of the American people, Americans for Free Market is calling for Congress to advance these critical laws and reforms, strengthen President Trump's leadership here. To learn more about it, go to forfreemarkets.org, forfreemarkets.org. Now, I also want you to protect yourself going into the year ahead. Webroot.com/Hewitt. Webroot.com/Hewitt. Every day I have to wade through with a machete the phishing attempts to get into my material. Right now, this holiday season, 60% off Webroot, all-in-one protection for less than $75 only at webroot.com/Hewitt. You can give the gift of cybersecurity and peace of mind starting at less than $20 with my exclusive offer. Webroot is the perfect gift for even the hardest to shop for person. With device identity and privacy protection covered under one subscription, it's a no-brainer. Now 60% off. The all-in-one product comes with a couple of options for you. One identity and up to 5 devices. Or, for a family, 10 identities and 10 devices. Protect yourself and your family from cybercrime this holiday. All you have to do is go to webroot.com/Hewitt. New year, new devices, new you, new with webroot.com/Hewitt. Finally, I'm in the Relief Factor studio. I did get out. Got my 3 in this morning once it stopped raining. It's no longer cold here. It was just raining this morning. But I got my 3 in, and tomorrow's the long one. I think we're going to have nice weather in the morning. I carry a curcumin. I can't take it. I have no water. So I'll have to do that next hour. I forgot to reload the water. Let me just tell you, though, relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Why do I take it every day? Because I do between 3 and 6, sometimes 10 miles on the mornings when it's not below freezing or raining. Today was a 3-miler. Yesterday was 4. Tomorrow's the longer distance. Don't feel a thing. Why? Because make it regular and take the Relief Factor to keep your body's anti-inflammatory system in peak shape. Icarian curcumin, resveratrol, omega-4 pills. I take them every day. They're easy to swallow. They're easy to take. I usually have a sip of Trader Joe's water, but I forgot to get it. I'll get it for next hour. So don't go anywhere except to Relief Factor. You can call 1-800-4 and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or go to their website, relieffactor.com. The starter pack is there, less than $1 a day, relieffactor.com. Let me save you some money right now. I've been telling you every day about Consumer Cellular, and I want to tell you about it again. The phone number is 1-800-411-4454, 1-800-411-4454, or you can go to consumercellular.com/Hugh. It's consumercellular.com/Hugh. The reason you want to do that is to save money. Have you looked at your phone bill lately? Do you have any idea how much you're paying? And don't be tempted by the, hey, phone on us, big wireless offers there. Phone is not free, typically the most expensive one. Look at the actual cost of the plan that you're paying for, the length of the contract before you make what could be a $1,000 mistake. And now, for a limited time only, you can get a second month of service for free when you switch to Consumer Cellular. It takes less than 20 minutes. My special promo code is Hugh, H-U-G-H, or visit consumercellular.com/Hugh, or call 1-800-411-4454 and mention Hugh to get your second month free. Here's something my 50-year-old and older listeners love. 2 unlimited lines of data, unlimited data, for just $60. That's $30 per line, unlimited. It's an easy way to better manage your cost of living. For a limited time, call 1-800-411-4454 and get your second month free by using the promo code Hugh, or go to consumercellular.com/Hugh. Finally, I want to talk to you about pharmawindfall.com. I talk to you about pharmawindfall.com every day. I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think we're going to have any weird stuff happen in the last week where Big Pharma swoops in and scoops out all sorts of money. But President Trump has stood up to Big Pharma. He's demanded best favored nation treatment of all drugs. Some other countries getting a lower price for a drug. He wants that lower price here. He wants pharma's plan to hijack any health reform agenda stopped. No big government mandates to tell people what they've got to buy, when they've got to buy it. All of that is done at the expense of the American family. Conservatives for lower health care costs warns that this agenda would mean billions in higher premium drug costs. President Trump is not intimidated by the lobbyists. Republicans shouldn't be either. Time to join conservatives for lower health costs in supporting these reforms and in rejecting Big Pharma's agenda. Visit pharmawindfall.com. Join the fight against lower prices. And then finally, Angel Tree is asking you. We got 6 days left. We got 1.5 million children to serve. More and more of you come in every single day to help us with this. I'm just going to ask you to please go over to hughhewitt.com and find at the top, you will be able to find at the top, the banner. Here's James Ackerman, their CEO.
Your investment in Angel Tree enables that connection to be made between a mother and her child or a father and his child. They just can't afford to celebrate Christmas in the way that so many of us do every year. And by you stepping in, by you getting involved in Angel Tree, by you investing, you are enabling Christmas and the gospel to be brought to these children right into their own homes.
Every child costs $30. You can sponsor 5 children for $150. Call 888-206-2764, 888-206-2764, or the banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com. You've been mentioning it. You can say, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. Do it today, all right? HughHewitt.com, banner at the top. Joined by Ben Domenech. Ben is editor-at-large at The Spectator, Fox News contributor, owner of The Transom over at Substack. Ben, I got a big topic for you today. Started by the Big Ben podcast this week, which featured Robbie Starbuck. I don't know who he is. And I listened to him. And first of all, tell us who he is.
Well, Robbie Starbuck is an interesting cat because it's rare you have somebody who's influential in conservative politics who also is famous for having directed the music videos of groups like the Smashing Pumpkins. And he has directed in various music videos Natalie Portman and Jamie Foxx and people like that. He became more conservative while he was in California. He's someone who has a Cuban background and as such, was already pretty anti-communist and became someone who was essentially the tip of the spear when it came to identifying DEI programs within major corporate institutions in America. He drove the likes of J.P. Morgan and of Nike and a number of other institutions absolutely nuts by revealing the internal documents that they had leaked to him by various folks inside these entities that detailed DEI practices that were, quite frankly, illegal. I mean, things that were most, biased on race. And at the center of this, he became someone who was feared by corporate America to the point that, I literally have had so many people over the past couple of years say, do you have an in with Robbie Starbuck? We're worried he's going to come after, this, that, or the other client. And I'm like, go with God. Good luck.
Well, it was a great conversation, and I was going to add him to my list. I've just posted on X a list of influencers, people to whose influence you ought to be open. Not necessarily agree. There's some people on there I disagree with, but they make arguments. A couple of reporters, a couple of producers, a couple of people behind the scenes, but mostly people who make arguments. I didn't put them on there for a simple reason. I want your reaction to this. In your conversation at one point, he went off on a jag denouncing Congress for doing too little, and he didn't appear to me to know that you need 60 votes to move legislation in the Congress, in the Senate. And if you don't know that, you're going to have unrealistic expectations about what the Congress can do. Does that not trip your wire?
Well, it trips my wire a little bit, but I also think that one of the things that we should be cognizant of is that a lot of times in these conversations, people will extend out perhaps beyond what is feasible within the reality of the situation, as opposed to what their ambitions would be like. One, Ted Cruz, who I respect very much, ran into that a little bit back when he started out in the United States Senate. But one of the things that I think is key to appreciate at this moment is that there actually are a lot of I think an impressive number of younger voices that exist on the American right, broadly speaking. And this is one of the reasons why that whole idea that you had to entertain the likes of Nick Fuentes or something like that in order to reach younger people always struck me as ridiculous. It's because we actually have a surplus, if anything, of younger voices who are very interesting on the right. They don't agree about everything. They have different backgrounds. They have, you've got your homeschoolers, you've got your neocons, you've got your, people who were, actual soldiers in the war on terror who have differences of opinion on either side of it. You have people who have been through the elite institutions and want to retake them, and you have people who want to burn them to the ground. And those are all things that I think are healthy to have as a debate within the big tent of the right. And it's something that, quite frankly, did not exist, at least when I was coming up, as something that was more apparent. But now you've got a lot of people who are in their later 20s to sort of mid 40s who I would say have enough experience to be informed practitioners of the realm of politics and in the realm of policy, and people who actually aren't just shooting from the hip. And that's something that I think is very healthy and a very beneficial thing, because for a lot of us, who started out on this in the early 2000s, there was far less of a growth campaign for younger Americans to get into this system, unless their attitude was more just climbing through the ranks in order to achieve power for power's sake.
Now, what I wanted to ask you about is being influenced or being an influencer. That's a new term, right? There are a few grand old voices in the movement. Whenever I'm on a panel with Brit Hume, I just want to look at Brett Baer and say, I yield my time, Mr. Speaker, to Brit Hume. and there's George Will. And there are a few people like that. And then the boomers are rolling off in the next 5 to 10 years. We're all going to be retired. And then we got a pretty good healthy ranking from 50 to 70. I mean, people will be moving up. There are a lot of good voices. But under 45, it gets weird because they grew up in a different world, Ben. One where you didn't read a lot of books, where you didn't have to read Battle Cry of Freedom by James McPherson to understand the Civil War. You might have an opinion or two, but you had to do a lot of work. Do you think that 45 and under group are going to be ready for the debates that are coming?
I do, and one of the reasons that I think that is because of the number of organizations that exist that have helped them along. And I don't just mean the ones that are most prominent, institutions like Turning Point and the like, but there are a number of organizations that I think came out of the benefits of the 1980s and the success of the Reagan Revolution that have led to people having the opportunity to study more if they were interested in it. The fellowships that are on offer are significant. The people who are there and ready to help you along and to give you advice about what to read. And look, you are correct. You can get those gigs. You can get that imprimatur from a lot of different institutions without having done the necessary work. And I think, though, in time, that reveals itself. It reveals itself in the form of people who, are frankly not ready for those types of debates. This is the other thing that I want you to appreciate, Hugh, though. I think we really owe a debt to the Reagan generation of people, and I would include, not just the work of people who have surrounded you, but, I think of someone like Laura Ingraham, who I was reading and paying attention to when I was very young, who now, I was on her show last night, and I was talking about Erica Kirk, who's younger than me, and the leadership that she is representing. There is a continuum here that I think is really important, and it has helped the ideological health of the right in the way that I think the ideological side of the left has crushed any ability to disagree. The people who are disagreeing on the left, they're doing it from an outside position that is socialist, that really wants to demolish our institutions in a negative way, that views the United States as a sinful, craven, horrible place that needs to be upended, turned around and turned upside down in order to advance. And the reason that happened is because they didn't cultivate any kind of ideological disagreement. They only had the kind of neoliberal established Ezra Klein's Manic Glacius, Pod Save America bros at the top, and nobody else could really contend with them. And so what happens? You have a whole diaspora of people underneath Bernie Sanders who emerge and who, frankly, don't share any of the American values that even the left, has purported to share at various points. If you rewind, even 20 years ago, you could find a lot of things in common with a lot of mainstream Democrats, even moderate centrist Democrats, and I mean that in a true way, not a fanciful way. And yet today, the moderate centrist Democrats are just people who maybe don't talk as much about trans issues.
It's destroyed. Their party has shifted to the left. Now, in the Reagan years, since you bring them up, I was a kid in the briefcase carrier in the White House counsel's office, but they made a conscious effort to credential young people. Do you think that Trump administration is doing that?
So I believe that one of the big mistakes of the first go-round with the Trump administration is that they did not do that. that they did not do a good job of cultivating younger people. I think this one second time around is doing a better job, in part because they hired as many Gen Xers as they did within this cabinet who are mindful of the future and who are trying to bring up young people and help them get credentials. We do not want a situation where we have people who are 30 years removed from, having been sitting at important desks, back in control again. You want to have a situation where you've cultivated people who've learned both from the good and the bad of past decisions, and who can bring that knowledge to bear when it comes to the challenges of the future. I think particularly of China and the challenges that it represents. We don't want to have necessarily the same approach that we had, 25, 30 years ago with people who have great credentials, but also believed that we could bring China via most favored nation status into the broader world in a way that turned out not to be the case. And so, look, I believe we have a great variety of people. We have more libertarians. We have more populists. We have more people who didn't come up through the traditional era. We have people who love William F. Buckley and people who laugh at the invocation of William F. Buckley. And that's the kind of thing that I think is actually healthy. We can have that kind of debate.
Ben, I want to play for you what Erica Kirk said today at TPUSA's gathering in Phoenix, cut number 1.
We're going to ensure that President Trump has Congress for all 4 years. We are going to get my husband's friend, J.D. Vance, elected for 48 and the most resounding way possible.
All right, now, Ben, I have nothing but admiration for Erica Kirk. I don't know her. I knew Charlie as a colleague and a text friend and a couple of events, but not a good friend. This was a mistake, in my view, because
I'm glad that you said that, because I was sitting waiting to go live with Laura Ingraham last night in a van, and I heard her say this, and I cringed a little bit. I'm glad that you agree with me, but I'd love to hear why.
Well, because it's a long time to 2028. Many things can happen. And if other people get in, the people who might be thinking about running for it against J.D. Vance are not going to support TPUSA, right? It's why I never endorse anyone. I want to do the debates. I want to be fair to everyone. And can you actually go to TPUSA now if you're thinking about this and not get submarined?
Why would we adopt a college football playoff attitude when we could have an NFL playoff attitude? That's my perspective, Hugh. Look, I love a lot of these teams, but I'd like to see the Packers and the Bears go at it and see who comes out, and so it's the kind of thing where when it comes to JD, look, we've talked about how much we respect JD. Personally, I think he's the best vice president that we've had, the best, relationship that he's had with the principal since we saw Richard Nixon under Ike, and see that kind of relationship with a younger person who's going out there and fighting for the cause. That's great. There's going to be other people who run, and it's not just going to be people who are going at him from a more quote-unquote centrist position, presumably someone like Glenn Youngkin or somebody like that, business lobby perhaps. But this is the kind of thing where I think you're going to get some conservatives who are going to run because the timing is right, because everything is right in their lives to run. They think that they have a record to run on, et cetera. I think J.D. Vance probably emerges as the king of the castle at the end of that, just given the skill that he has shown. But having him earn it on the field is something that I think is really important.
It's good. That's why Hillary was a terrible candidate.
Exactly.
Hillary was terrible because she didn't do it.
Hillary had to face the kind of challenges that she had to in order to get that candidacy. She probably would have been a better candidate, and because she didn't, she ended up being a worse one. She wasn't prepared for any of the arguments used against her. And look, I personally think you're going to get at least one person in this race who is going to try to present themselves as the more authentic MAGA figure than J.D. Vance. And whoever that turns out to be, it's probably going to be a member of Congress. It's probably going to be somebody who, maybe surprises us by running. But it could be anybody, and they could be framing themselves as to his right. And that's something he's going to have to deal with as well. It's not just going to be someone where he can take up that position. And so because of that, I think an early endorsement is foolish. And look, I wish that she had just said it slightly differently, saying, look, if the nominee is J.D. Vance, of course we're going to fight so hard.
And he's my husband's friend, and I love him. That would have been fun. I mean, there were 3 knockdown fights, the Thrill in Manila, and 2 more, and Ollie won 2, and Frazier won 1, and at the end, Ollie was the greatest champion ever. So Ben Shapiro knocked Tucker around the room at the Heritage Foundation this week, and then they both met up at TPUSA, and Tucker gave his thing. Ben gave his thing, and Tucker did not answer the substance. He said, "You're attacking J.D. Vance, and that's why you're attacking me." That's a win by default. What do you think, for Ben Shapiro? What do you think?
So, look, I think he had a very challenging position to navigate there, and I think he decided to lean in to the nth degree, and I applaud him for it. Because
you mean Ben Shapiro?
Yeah, I think that you can't beat around the bush with this situation anymore. For all of us, even those of us who, like me, I mean, I feel like I was a Tucker Carlson defender far longer than a lot of people who I know. Because I have known him. I literally met him when I was 15, and I've always thought him to be one of the most charming, hilarious, entertaining people who I know within this industry, and I have very little had very little disagreement, I would say, with him until just the past couple of years. But one of the things that I think has been made clear in the time in recent times is just how much he is animated by a lot of, I think, personal vindictiveness, which is unfortunate, and which has overwhelmed a lot of the values that I thought that he had beforehand. Ben Shapiro, I think, took a bold stand in front of that audience. It could have gone a different way, but it went the way that it did. And the way that it went is that the people there, particularly the young people in the audience, and I want to point that out to every listener, the young people in the audience were clapping for Ben. They were clapping loudly for him because they are tired. They are sick and tired of having the wool pulled over their eyes by people who have personal gripes, vindictiveness, spite toward people who are leading other institutions, or who feel like they need to, make these wild claims in order to keep people listening to them. And, Ben Shapiro has his own tone. Sometimes it turns people off. Because
it's way too fast. I've told Ben. If anyone talks faster than me, it's too fast.
I know. But and I'm a Southerner, so it's even worse for me. But it's one of these things where I think that he prosecuted that case as well as anyone possibly could. And then I think Tucker got up there and really was unprepared to deal with it and tried to change the argument. I don't think it worked at all. And I think
now here's what I also want to get in before. Now it should be over. There are some people who do not deserve our attention, and I mean lunatics, and we do not need to deal with them. And there are some people for whom we don't want fights between them to go on. It's a big tent. It's a really big tent. And what Tucker does, he's an elegant writer. He can defend himself. He's got 1 million followers. He might choose to answer it, but he shouldn't answer it by saying you're really attacking J.D. Vance, because that's not really what's being attacked. Most of the people that applauded Ben love J.D. Vance. It's a false choice. You don't have to like Tucker and J.D. or you have to like Ben Shapiro. That's a false choice. It's a question of ideas. It's just about their ideas. Do you think we can get it back to that? Because I have no time for the nutters. None. I don't want to talk about the nutters.
Hugh, the truth is that we have to get back to that. And the reason we have to get back to that is because the longer we spend getting involved in these personal fights where you have to pick sides and where, you listen to this person and I listen to this person and we have to have a dispute about it, that doesn't make any sense, especially at this particular moment, Hugh, when it actually is clear that there's so much that can be done and that should be being argued in the public square that people are being distracted from, quite frankly, by all sorts of ludicrous, conspiracizing and kind of stand-in fights for other things, and that's just not, there's no point to that. We should be arguing about how to move this country forward and about the best way to do it, the policies that ought to be pursued by this Congress and by this Republican majority and by the president. We should be talking about what ought to be done as it relates to the world at large. And I think that conversation would be happening in the absence of a lot of this. And unfortunately, we've been sucked into it. It's natural because of the power of charismatic people using the sounding board of a massive megaphone online. But we've got to get out of it. And I think, quite frankly, I hope that the Ben Shapiro message is one that helps us get out of it and helps.
I think it will, and I
generally acknowledge it.
I don't want Charlie Kirk's murderer to have successfully destroyed his movement by unleashing 100 different demons, people in anger and people who are grieving, and I just don't want that because he built a very good GOTV. I've always thought Turning Point is GOTV. I didn't think of it like the National Review every 2 years they get together and have an ideas summit. That's not what it is. It's a GOTV effort, and I just want it to work and keep working. So I'll give you the last word.
I do too. I think it's possible. I'm hopeful, and I quite frankly believe that this Pandora's box that this shooter, this assassin opened, is one that actually has a lot more hope as it relates to Americans, young Americans in particular, coming back to faith in their own lives, being motivated by the things that motivated Charlie, appreciating those aspects of him beyond just the get out the vote effort. And that's something that I think is very healthy, beneficial, and good for the country. I just want it to be more centered around that, as opposed to these ridiculous, vindictive, and pointless conspiracy theories mounted by people who are only getting the attention in part because it benefits the left to promote them. It benefits the other side of this argument to promote them. And foisting that along on quite frankly, a number of people who I think don't have the necessary defenses against something like that because they have trusted these voices for so long.
Well said. And on that note, we'll talk to you maybe once more before Christmas. If we don't, Merry Christmas, Ben. Have a great one. And don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back with Michael Lawler, who may or may not, this might be his last appearance on the show. We'll see. Let me remind you, I still don't have any water, so I haven't taken my Relief Factor pills. I haven't been able to get to the water supply, so I've got them right here. But I'm in the Relief Factor studio, and I will take them before I leave for special report tonight. Relief Factor is absolutely something I take every day for the simple reason that whether I'm going 2, 3, 4, 6, 10, no more than 13. I can't do more than a half marathon anymore. No matter how far I'm trundling, Relief Factor keeps the minor aches and pains away. So you ought to give it a try. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. $19.95 is the starter pack, a 3-week supply, $19.95. Then I will also tell you, you can find that starter pack at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. And let me ask you, please don't forget Angel Tree. Played you Jim Ackerman's quote earlier in the show, CEO of Angel Tree and Prison Fellowship. Your generosity in these closing days makes all the difference. There's one marginal kid, one kid who doesn't get on the list because we run out of money. Add that kid to the list. Another $30 donation. The banner is at the top of HughHewitt.com. Please be as generous as you can be. Maybe you can't be Carol and Jan and set the record, but maybe you can be. And maybe you want to. You can do it via the banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. Joined by Congressman Mike Lawler. Mike Lawler represents New York's 17th Congressional District. He won in 2022. He won in 2024. He's been on the program before. I get along with him really well. I like him a lot. But I think I'm going to have to support his Democratic opponent in 2026. And I wanted to talk to him about that. And he was kind enough to come on. Congressman, welcome back. I'm very upset about the discharge petition. And I don't want to talk about the merits. I want to talk about what you did to my party that I've spent my life building, which has put all of your colleagues in a terrible position. Why should I overlook that?
Well, respectfully, Hugh, this is a situation where Democrats shut the government down for 43 days. They made the issue of the enhanced premium tax credit the quote-unquote reason for the shutdown. And as I did during the shutdown, I went and exposed Leader Jeffries' hypocrisy on that, showing full well that that really was not, A, the issue, and B, they had no interest in solving it. When the government reopened, we sat down, a bipartisan group of us, to actually come up with a plan to reform the system. It would do a 2-year extension, but it would actually start to make changes that conservatives have wanted to make to Obamacare for years. Income limits, insurance reforms, rooting out fraud in the system. Eliminating the zero premium plans and actually requiring a payment from the individual, PBM reform, HSA expansion. We worked then, the group of us that on the Republican side, worked with House Republican leadership to force a vote. We wanted to put the bill on the floor And frankly, let the Democrats vote yay or nay. And my suspect was going to be that if there was a zero premium plan elimination in there, most of the Democrats would vote no. And we worked through this. We tried to get it to the floor. Ultimately, we could not reach an agreement for various reasons. There was disagreement within our conference on a few fronts. But this is something that I felt very strongly about, both from a political standpoint, but also from a policy standpoint. Doing nothing was not a solution. The fact is that for the 7% of people who rely on the enhanced premium tax credit, they are going to see an exponential spike. And we have been pushing leadership for months to say, okay, we need a Republican plan. We need to address the issue of healthcare affordability. It's not enough to just say Obamacare bad and we hate Obamacare. We all know Obamacare doesn't work, and certainly not the way Democrats said it would work in terms of reducing costs. But we are in the majority, and we have a responsibility to govern and to address these issues. What I suspect with the discharge, what's going to happen when we come back in January, it'll pass the House. It'll go to the Senate.
Wait, stop.
The Senate,
stop.
Yep.
Stop. What'll happen is all of the Republicans except the 4 will vote against that discharge petition because it's bad law. Am I right?
No, I think there will be more than the 4 voting in favor of moving.
Not if I've got anything to do with it, because it is such a bad idea. I just want to stay on the discharge petition. I'll debate Obamacare with you for 3 hours, but the discharge petition.
Nobody's defending the 3-year. I said, even as recent as yesterday, the 3-year is not acceptable policy. The problem is we need a vehicle to actually get reforms done. When the 3-year passes, the discharge will be voted on January 6th. When the 3-year extension passes the House, the Senate will not pass that. They've already shown they won't pass that. And Leader Thune said that again.
Congressman, all due respect, it's not the Senate. We're not going to filibuster. I'm focused on one thing, which is you threw a hand grenade into my party that I spent my life defending, and 213 or 212 of them are going to have to vote against what looks like it's a good idea, and that's going to be an ad against all of them. And if you can't get David Joyce, you can't get the most reasonable guy in the House. And he's my congressman from Ohio if I were still living in Ohio. You threw all your guys overboard. A minute to the break, and then we'll keep going.
Well, respectfully, many of my colleagues have actually thanked us for doing it, because we need to have a vote and actually advance bipartisan legislation that includes reforms to Obamacare. So the fact is, Hugh, this is my party too. I've spent my career electing Republicans and conservatives across this country and in New York, but we have a responsibility to govern, and I'm not going to shirk in that responsibility because there's a dispute within the House.
I supported you when you used your leverage on the SALT deduction. I understand your district. I understand it's difficult. But when you sign a discharge petition and the leadership says don't do it, you are exposing, can I at least get you to admit, it's going to be an ad in every marginal district in 2026 that they voted against extending Obamacare subsidy. It'll be a lie, but it'll be an ad, and they'll be voting against them.
Well, the ads were already written about allowing it to expire. And that's the fundamental problem. That's why I said this is political malpractice, not to have a solution to this issue, coupled with the larger reforms that we passed yesterday in the House that every Democrat voted against. I voted for our speaker's plan because we do want to address the larger issue of healthcare. But to just dismiss the 7% and say, oh, it's okay, their healthcare premiums can go up, I'm not okay with that. And I know many of my colleagues
dismissing them. It is not dismissing them. It is saying that
you have to have a plan.
Go ahead, sir.
And you have to have a plan, and we didn't have one in time with the expiration of these premium tax credits. And by the way, we didn't just raise this issue because Democrats raised it. Members brought this up earlier this year in May when we were negotiating the One Big Beautiful Bill. We brought it up in September before the shutdown. This was something that's been discussed within our conference for months. And so it's not like people were shocked that this was an issue we had to deal with.
No, but it's the discharge petition. I'm really being focused here. I'm being focused.
Yep.
I might agree with you. I've been arguing for tax credits that are targeted for people who are 200% of the poverty line and are stuck in the state exchanges. There's a big debate to be had. There's plenty of time to do it afterwards. But the 3-year extension is bad law. It is inflationary law. It will never pass. It's a complete showboat. And what I'm really I don't even mind that. I mind the fact that you probably cost seats to the Republican Party because they have to vote on the discharge petition, and it's like voting on a hand grenade.
I disagree with you. Doing nothing will cost us seats. And what we did, and I just have a fundamental difference of opinion on the discharge. And many of my colleagues have signed discharge petitions, especially in recent years, including on conservative issues. The discharge petition is a tool of every member. It's not just a tool of the minority. And sometimes, like we saw back when John Boehner was Speaker, and the far right did not want the XM Bank to move forward, John Boehner did the wink and the nod and said, go sign the discharge so we can move the bill. It is a
and I do not object to the discharge petition. I object. That's
Yep.
filibustering. I object to this one at this time when the country believes that the Obamacare 3-year extension has a prayer, and you have already admitted it doesn't have a prayer. It will never pass.
I've said it will not pass, but we needed a vehicle, okay, to get an actual bill passed. And so what's going to happen? The 3-year will pass the House. The Senate will not pass it. They've already voted it down. They did it last week when Chuck Schumer brought it up, and I slammed Schumer for just doing a hyper-partisan 3-year bill. I slammed Leader Jeffries for just doing the hyper-partisan 3-year bill and not supporting the compromise bill that we negotiated. But we needed a vehicle that could get to 218.
But the compromise
so that
bill
we could
passed.
actually have a vote.
I'll come back on the other side. The compromise bill did pass, did it not?
I'm sorry, did pass what?
The compromise bill, the House bill, did pass.
No, we introduced it. We signed a discharge on it, but unfortunately the Democrats wouldn't.
Like Christmas.
Welcome back, America. Friends can disagree, and sometimes they have falling outs, and I'm having one with Michael Lawler because we're talking past each other. Congressman, the GOP health care plan in the House did pass, did it not?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the GOP plan that we put forward. Yes. Yep.
So there is a vehicle that will go to the Senate. That vehicle will not get 60 votes. So if there's going to be a resolution, it's going to be done in the Senate because the House can't do anything, but this can do anything by majority, but it takes 60 votes in the Senate. So you didn't need to sign the discharge bill to get a vehicle. You're making a facetious argument. You did that. I don't know why you did it. I think you're smart. You know what you're doing. You've used leverage before. Why would you put your members, your colleagues, your friends, the party in the peril that you did? And why shouldn't I be this pissed off?
Look, I disagree with you about us putting our majority in peril. Doing nothing on the issue that Democrats weaponized during the shutdown and that the media has tried to explain to voters is the reason their healthcare premiums are going up, when you and I both know Obamacare itself is the reason. It has failed to actually reduce cost. But doing nothing on this was the wrong decision. And we had an internal battle over this. And 4 of us signed the discharge, but I'm telling you, there are a lot more, A, that were willing to sign it, and B, that want something done on this. And so we are going to get a resolution come January and force a vote so that we can actually get a compromise bill.
You could I want to go through your objection. Doing nothing. The Republicans didn't do nothing. They passed an alternative. And as we just let the audience know it passed. Number two.
That you just pointed out is not going to become law because it won't get the Democrat votes in the Senate.
Just like the discharge petition. So we have something to put into the Senate's lap so that they can begin the negotiations. It didn't have to be the discharge petition. But as you just pointed out, the media has been framing this to hurt Republicans because the media is left wing. You fed into that narrative. And no matter how many people came up and whispered to you, way to go, Mike, 4 of you signed it. 4 of you sent it to the floor, and it's going to force a vote where 214 Republicans are going to have to say no. Maybe it'll be 212. And that, because of the media that we just discussed, is going to be the ad that sinks them. So I don't know how you can walk away from the car crash when you were driving and saying, I got nothing to do with that. It wasn't me.
Again, we're just going to disagree because the reality is the ads were already written about the expiration of the tax credit. We are seeking to do a two-pronged solution. Number one, having an answer on the enhanced premium tax credit with reforms. Number two, addressing the larger issues within the healthcare system, which you and I are in full agreement is a broken system under Obamacare. Healthcare premiums have risen 96%, and meanwhile, insurance profits are up over 2,000% because Obamacare was written by the insurance companies for the insurance companies. That system needs to be reformed, and we have a plan that actually will start to reform the system. And that's what we're seeking to get across the finish line. You know this better than anybody.
I got 2 questions for you, Congressman. I got 2 questions before we run out of time. One, can you take your name off the discharge petition?
No, it's already active. It's 218.
Will you can, however, apologize for it and reconsider and say I made a mistake? Will you think about doing that between now and January so that you vote against the petition you forced onto the floor?
Look, I am comfortable with my decision, and the decision I made, I didn't make it lightly, and I made it after exhausting every single option we had before us within our House Republican conference. We worked tirelessly to get a deal with leadership, and unfortunately, as the speaker said, we just couldn't, solve this Rubik's Cube. There were a lot of reasons why, and ultimately, this is the decision I made.
So, Congressman, did you or did you not win on the SALT cap? You won on the SALT cap.
We did.
Yeah. So the party has been good for you. The party did what you needed done. The party Mike Lawler got what he needed. So I'm listening to an ungrateful guy in a marginal district who wants the NRCC to support him and people like me to do it. And you're ungrateful. I'm just furious that you did this. Do you understand that?
Yeah, respectfully, Hugh, I'm not ungrateful in the least, but I know this. My seat is one of only 3 seats in the country that Kamala Harris won, that a Republican represents. We're at 220. If we lose those seats, we're out of the majority. It's that simple. And I am fighting to represent my district, to represent my constituents, and to give us the majority and keep Speaker Johnson in the speaker's chair and keep the gavels. So it's not about being ungrateful. All right. I've eaten a lot of votes this year on things that I don't necessarily agree with. There's people on the other side of the conference that have eaten votes on SALT that they don't necessarily agree with. That's what happens when you have a small majority. Everybody's got to give and take.
Do you listen when you're out in the district? If enough people come up to you and say, I heard the Hewitt and Hewitt's right, and you should apologize and vote against your discharge petition, will you listen to them? Because I think you're a smart guy who made a mistake, and that shouldn't end your career. You should win. But there are people like me who are just going to say, you're more trouble than you're worth. We'll win the majority somewhere else. Because if you stab me in the back, you'll stab me in the front. And this was a real backstab, Mike.
Yeah, Hugh, number one, I do listen to my constituents. I'm out every single day meeting with constituents when I'm not in D.C. I do dozens of events, every week in my district. So I talk to everybody across the spectrum. Number two, I'm very blunt and direct. I don't hide. I don't mince words.
I'm not being very subtle here either.
No, but my point is I'm not backstabbing anybody. I was very clear with the speaker what was going to happen if we couldn't figure this out. And so there was no backstabbing. It was straightforward. And I've owned my decision, and I've explained it. And people have every right to disagree with it, but it's not backstabbing. It's very straightforward.
Okay, I'm going to pray for a Christmas miracle. I know you're Catholic. Maybe on midnight mass you realize you should apologize for this. I hope so. Mike, by the way, thank you for coming on. You knew it was going to be a rough go, and I appreciate that you found the time to do it. A Merry Christmas to you, Congressman. Talk to you in the new year. Time for the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tarzana Joe. Hello, Joe.
Hello, you.
I love
My job
that.
is to lighten the mood. Yes, thank you. As you know, my actual last name is just one vowel off the big guy's name. So if you're looking for a great Christmas gift, stocking stuffer, the second best of Tarzana Joe, and It Only Hurts When I Rhyme, they'll ship, get you by Christmas. And speaking of
And they're both
Christmas,
available at tarzanajoe.com.
and Amazon.com.
There you go.
Speaking of Christmas presents, I've finished Christmas shopping, but there's some folks we all missed. I'm speaking of the people who are on the naughty list. Even dear old Santa has left them overlooked. Their wassail has gone sour, and their goose is overcooked. I ought to get them something, a tie or deli slicer, in hopes of them becoming not naughtier, but nicer. For Senator Chuck Schumer, who's done so much for unity, a luxury apartment in a retirement community. For our old friend Jim Comey, who's joined the literati, a month of consultations with Michael Avenatti. For Legal Light, Letitia James, please know all is forgiven. Down payment on a city flat you actually can live in. And then for Gavin Newsom, who thinks that he's the best of us, confinement to the Golden State to suffer with the rest of us. And what about Joe Biden? Now, this one shouldn't be hard. Let's all chip in and buy the guy a new library card. I hope this rhyme was not too mean, but if you don't agree, I guess that this time next year, it's the naughty list for me. That's I've Got a Little List by Tarzana Joe.
It'll never be the naughty list for you, Joe, but I want to let people know that they can get your 2 books of poetry at Amazon. What do they look under, though? Do they look under Tarzana Joe?
Tarzana Joe, yeah.
Tarzana Joe and Amazon, you'll go right there. And if they need a poem for the new year, I think you should cut off Christmas Eve poems, right? You're not doing any more Christmas Eve poems. Tarzanajoe.com, they have a button there that says, I need a poem. And his rates are reasonable. Inflation is barely brushed by Tarzana Joe. I did a post on inflation, Joe. Do you know what it was over the last 5 years? 30%.
Ouch.
Have you raised your poetry prices 30%?
No, they've held steady. If I had not held my prices, it would be 32%. But I stayed steady, and I saved the country 2%.
Well, there you go. That's another reason to get a poem from Joe for the New Year's Eve celebration, for which there's plenty of time. For the family Christmas card, not so much. But for anything happening in 2026, tarzanajoe.com, tarzanajoe.com. Joe, thank you very much. Don't know if I'm talking to you next week or not. I don't think so. So, Merry Christmas. I'll talk to you before in the new year, maybe.
Very good.